Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining for the first time, I appreciate your time. It is important to know that government officials, experts, diplomats, and very important strategic consultants around the regions, the continent of Africa, are observing the United States of America's disgraceful engagement with the continent of Africa, specifically South Africa and Egypt. More importantly, at this time, one of Africa's leading statesmen have come out clear and take a position that the continent of Africa must to an extent go back to the drawing board and start reviewing a strategic partnership with the country of the United States of America and across the board.
That delegation of Aziz Bahad wrote a report and said, in fact, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And that report was submitted to the UN Security Council.
Why am I saying this? The former South African president, Mr. Thabo Mbeki, has observed these particular discussions, looking how South Africa has been pushed back and forth and how African countries have lost in terms of aid cutting. That at this moment, according to him, at this particular time, is when Africa must seize this opportunity and go back to look at its equality. Africa must engage from a strategic equality point of view, according to his own perspective, that at this moment is not a time to waver. That more importantly, the United States of America should understand that the world is not what it used to be, that we are talking about a multipolar world at this moment, that the continent of Africa is a strategic zone that to an extent has huge influence, and that the continent of Africa will not waver and will not sit to see that a particular conversation and interaction is being put at the second burner in regards to how we interact with global partners. Mr. Mbeki was talking from a point of experience as a former head of state, considering his position at the moment, reminding the African Union that it is important for you to go ahead and review how we interact with our geopolitical partners. These are important conversations where the continent of Africa must note that Europe is not coming to save you, the United States is not coming to save you, Asian partners are not coming to save you. However, you can work alongside China, Russia, other fringe powers across European Union, even the United States of America, including other emerging partners like Turkey and also some Middle Eastern partners. However, Africa should go on the international scene as one voice and more importantly talk on a win-win part, with more importantly to an extent talk about equals.
Our country, a member state of the African Union, would present to the AU a concrete program Africa should follow practically to define and find its rightful place in the emerging multipolar world. Thus, at last, would Aziz's dream be realized of ensuring that Africa interacts with the rest of the world as an equal among equals.
Former President Thabo Mbeki says South Africa must lead efforts to ensure that Africa responds timely to the ever-evolving global balance of forces. Mbeki delivered a keynote address at the inaugural dialogue to preserve the legacy of the extraordinary diplomat and former Foreign Affairs Deputy Minister Aziz Bahad. He says Bahad never feared responsibility.
That delegation of Aziz Bahad wrote a report and said, in fact, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And that report was submitted to the UN Security Council. When the President George Bush at some point called me to say that he was very, very concerned about the possibility of this war and wanted to avoid it if he could, I said to him, there is a report at the Security Council which says there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And he should please access that report. I don't know if he did. But I'm telling you this story because just as an indication of the kind of serious engagements in which Aziz would get involved.
The former president also touched on the current tension between the US and South Africa.
South Africa itself, of course, has been exposed to some action by the Trump administration. The challenge remains, with all these various assessments of what the Trump administration stands for, how should we relate to the US under the Trump administration? In my view, not a very straightforward matter. But I believe that in this regard, DECO must give us the lead.
This particular outing by the former South African president is an illustration. It means that the continent of Africa is paying attention on what is going on between Washington and Pretoria. More importantly, again, he went ahead to talk about the multipolar nature of the current international community, that the United States of America to an extent should know that other countries have priorities and other countries have international interests as well, that the continent of Africa will continue to clash with the United States of America. According to him, the next 4 years is going to be a challenging period, and why Africa as a continent should stand firm and make its position heard.
As Aziz insisted, we are seeing the emergence of a multipolar world, to which Anjana here referred. The issues we've been discussing are part of that multipolarity. And many were surprised when the new U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said during an interview on the 30th of January this year, and I quote, "So it's not normal for the world to simply have a unipolar power. That was an anomaly. It was a product of the end of the Cold War, but eventually you are going to reach back to a point, where you had a multipolar world, multi-great powers in different parts of the planet." He said, we face that now with China and to some extent Russia.
These are challenging times in the continent of Africa, and African countries should to an extent revise their position, and the African Union to an extent should rethink the way that it engages partners around the world. More importantly, countries like Egypt, looking at Djibouti, South Africa for example, have come under tremendous pressure from the country of the United States of America. Looking at Lesotho, to an extent being lambasted by the United States of America's president.
$8 million to promote LGBTQI+ in the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of.
The continent of Africa, according to Mr. Mbeki, it's about time it continued to look at more critical issues that will give the continent of Africa the leverage it needs to focus, to stand firm, and also make its point heard from several areas. It is important to note that the continent of Africa is not what it used to be. A lot has happened considering what's going on in the Sahel regions, as France has lost its influence across the Western African part. France continued to build new relationships in the Anglophone zones of the continent of Africa. However, France's image to an extent has come under a number of questions regards to his particular engagement in terms of trade. The Chinese at the moment are making headwinds with regards to their particular engagement and involvement in the continent of Africa.
We continue to veil our mutual beneficial trade relations with the USA, and we continue to extend a hand to bridge our recently challenging relationship with South Africa. I know that there is a yearning from some amongst us that for us to show that we are courageous, we should be trading insult with other countries, ignoring all the firm and courageous positions that this country has taken on progressive internationalism. We are practicing diplomacy. We are not in the business of trading insults with anyone in the world. We will remain firm on our principled positions. We will continue to pursue our national interests in line with diplomatic decorum. If we disagree with any country, it should be on the basis of substance and not on the basis of insults.
However, at this time of Africa's history, the continent of Africa will begin to engage those partners to an extent that provides a win-win partnership. And the United States of America, especially under the current president Donald Trump, after cutting aid and to an extent threatening to lambast a number of countries regards to trade tariffs, African countries, like the president said, should rethink their position at the moment and see what works and what does not work. According to him, based on my own perspective, African countries should go in as one voice and weed out those partners that has nothing to offer on the table.
Mbeki's speech focused on the Trump administration and its overall impact in the world as the trade war intensifies and the dynamics between Pretoria and Washington.
It was intentional because the question of the US is occupying everyone's mind. Trump is shaking every tree around the world. the Europeans, the Africans. So the challenge that the president raised was, how do we interface with this new administration in Washington? And he was emphasizing global political issues, changing multipolarity, as to, is there institutional capacity within DECO to interface and deal with these new emerging challenges? There are challenges, there are opportunities too in what the Trump administration is presenting around the world.
Khailisha Kumalo, SABC News, Pretoria.
Let me know in the comment section what you think regards to Mr. Mbeki's own perspective on what's going on around the world, talking about the multipolar nature of things and how he perceives the United States of America's approach towards his country of South Africa and the continent at large. And let me know if you think this time is a moment that expert, geopolitical analysts, historians will say Africa stood up firm to major powers like the United States of America to stick it, as we see South Africa to an extent is standing up to the United States of America despite accusations that have not been founded to an extent. For now, we will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.